David, it's finally good to see you face to face. We talked on Black Ops 2.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And you mentioned this back about...
That did okay.
Yeah. A couple of bucks.
I made some money.
But you had mentioned this show, and I was excited from the get-go on this show. And I love the details. I love the historical, the details that, I don't know how much time you've spent on the research on this.
A lot of time. A lot. I mean, we have a full-time researcher on the show, which is great. And I spent a lot of time, just read a ton of shit. Excuse my French. Went to a lot of museums, that kind of stuff.
And I was talking to Rosario before, but you obviously take the basis of who this character is, Leonardo, and how amazingly adventurous and what a forerunner he was, and then you're going, particularly this season, it seems way off into speculation. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, there are 4 missing years in his life. That's between about 27 and 32. No one knows where he was or what he was doing. There's a huge section of his notebooks that are missing.
Yeah.
So whereas a lot of the stuff that occurs in Italy and stuff that occurred in the first season had historical linchpins to hold people's hand as we walk through, in the second season, there are where Riario and Da Vinci and other characters go in South America. There's nothing written.
That was always the pitch, is that there was this beautiful chunk of missing years, and even within this time period, famously, I mean, we have 2 letters that Leonardo wrote claiming that he was in Syria working for the Ottoman Empire. We're not making this up. There are 2 letters that exist saying that's what he was doing, and some people say, historians say that it was a joke, and then other people claim that's what he was really doing. But also I've been reading a lot recently. A number of books have come out positing that China had sent 2 missions to the Americas, I think in the 10th century and the 12th century, and that they had explorers there, and that there were a number of Europeans that were there well before Pizarro and others. And so I had always joked that this show was the secret history of the man who invented the future, but by extension kind of the secret history of the world. So I had always intended this show to travel all over the world, and these are his hidden adventures.
So you have to go 4 years missing. He could be anywhere.
He could be anywhere.
Yeah.
So you're really expanding the world in this series because you're going out of England. So
yeah. I mean, we're not just in Florence. We're in Rome. We're in Genoa. We're in Naples, and then we're in South America, and technically, I guess, we're in Peru and Panama, I guess, for some of the show, and then we're in another country that we're not allowed to talk about yet, that we'll be showing later on in the season.
Yeah. Season 3, another planet.
Yes.
There's no limit to the scope of the show.
Yeah. We could go down under in season 3.
Down under, go to Australia.
New Zealand.
The nice thing is, having pulled off, Starz had some apprehension about how we were going to pull off the Inca Empire, but
some apprehension is an understatement.
Yes, but they were really happy. I mean, we're almost done filming the second season. They were really happy with what we pulled off, and I can genuinely say that the effects and the sets and the visuals are even more spectacular this season than last season. And having pulled that off, they said, okay, we'll give you license. You can take this show anywhere in the world you want now. That's cool. We feel like you can pull it off.
As long as you stay in Wales?
No, I mean, we didn't completely shoot in Wales. We shot plate photography in Mexico, and we were in Cornwall, which is outside of Wales, and knock on wood, but we're talking about a 3rd season, and I actually hope to physically bring the main cast and crew to another country for 2 or 3 weeks to do some filming, but I don't want to say what that country is because it'll give away some of where we're going to be this season.
Mr. Goyer.
Yes.
What's your writing process like? More specifically, how do you go from the initial idea to fleshing it out to a TV show or a movie?
I always start with a research period, which is I just blue sky and read any and everything that I can, and even if that's Batman or Superman, I read stuff, anything I think might. I'm fortunate that I also have. I mean, we have a researcher that works full time on Da Vinci, but I also have a researcher that I employ that works full time for me, which is awesome. And I'll just say, get me stuff on whatever, nanotechnology and this and that, and he's got a fun job. And so I start with that for a month or two, and then I start outlining, and then I write an outline, and it's for myself that I don't show to the studios, and then I do a first draft, and just go from there.
I studied Da Vinci in college, I guess, but I didn't know most of the things that I've learned from the show. What's the most surprising thing about him that you've learned from doing this?
It was probably his anatomy and dissection of corpses. When I saw an exhibition of his that showed how deep into anatomy he went, at the very end there was a piece saying that if it was lost to history or put in an archive, that work, but if it had come out, he would be the greatest anatomist that had ever lived. You think, how's that just a side, something that no one, a hobby? How do you have that as a hobby, and you would have been the greatest at it if anyone had ever known? So moments like that, but also I was, and it's the strange, the double-edged sword of the part is that people have such expectations of who he was, and yet you want to do justice to the stuff that you found out about him in his 20s that no one really knows.
But there's also a lot of misinformation about him.
There is.
I mean, a lot of people say they know him.
He's held in such high regard that people assume they have an idea in their head of who he is, and you want to do, particularly in art, sort of a slightly crazy version of it, the version that has the foundations in reality as best as possible, and that reality isn't necessarily what's in people's heads.
And we found out, we were in Florence when we premiered the show last year, and we found out some things that, I mean, this is true, but it's too crazy. Like, if we did it, people would say it's bullshit, which is that at one point Leonardo and Botticelli had a restaurant on the Ponte Vecchio together, and
it's the sitcom version.
Yeah, and this is true, and it ran for about a year, but it failed because they were much more concerned about like the presentation of the food than they were about getting the food out on time and stuff. And
that was these historians that were telling us that was when you realised that no matter what you do, you can't. We're not going. The show is what the show is. We're not going to please everyone. I watched two historians argue so hard. Someone said Leonardo was a very thin man. He was a very, very thin man who only ate vegetables. And the other one, what are you talking? He was fat. He loves cake. And these two Italians arguing.
And these are Italian historians getting in a fight over it.
Over cake
or
vegetables.
You know what? We can't. There's no winning. You know, everyone has their conceptions of him, so we're just going to do our version.
Which is nice, because then you can take your own liberties. And you're like, well, this is my version.
Yeah.
And this season, certainly people know what they're going to get. So
I mean, I think first season people are like, well. You know, his hair is longer, or this or that, and then, but I mean, I just love the fact that Vasari, who was a fairly contemporary biographer, said that he bent, steel bars with his hands and wrestled with bears. Like, I don't think that really happened, but that was
regardless, I'm wrestling a bear.
Yeah.
Who's worse at nitpicking, Da Vinci scholars or comic book fans?
Oh, comic book fans. I find Da Vinci scholars to be more forgiving than comic book fans. But I get angry at the comic book fans because I know this stuff just as well as they do. So I'm like, you know what? Shut up.
Were you outraged about the Ben Affleck casting too?
No.
He was involved.
He's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Trust me.
He had some writers to say something with Matt Fraction and Jonathan Hickman.
Yes. Well, that's one of the I continue to be a comic book fan, and I was a fan of Hickman and Fraction's work, and I did not know them. And one of the perks of this job is occasionally you can call up people like that and say to Starz, I want to bring these comic book guys in. And they're like, really? Have you ever written a script before? Nope. But I want to give them a try, and so I cold called both of them and said, okay, I've got this crazy proposition. Do you want to come in and join the writer's room, for 2 or 3 weeks and do an episode each with us, and you'll get an entree into script writing, and I've since become friends with both of them, and
they really grabbed the opportunity with both hands. I mean, the episodes they've written are fantastic.
Yeah.
I said yesterday the Matt Fraction episode is the most Da Vinci's Demons-y episode of Da Vinci's Demons that you can imagine.
That was, I cherry picked it because that I wrote that one with Matt, and I was like, okay, I'm doing that one.
Because Jonathan did Shield series with Leonardo in.
I know.
It was almost like Leonardo in the Marvel universe.
I know.
Now he's going to Leonardo in your universe. which is quite
Well, he had written that. I had already written the pilot for Da Vinci's Demons before that thing by Hickman had come out. And then when he came to LA to visit for the show, and we showed him the pilot, we were both writing these sort of crazy alternate histories with Leonardo da Vinci, so who knows, maybe third season we'll bring in someone else.
I love how you depict the invention, how Leonardo comes up with the inventions. Are those all actually accurate? Everything you're saying and show, not clear how he came up with it.
Pretty much. I mean, he didn't necessarily build them, but they're certainly his.
Yeah, some of them he designed. I mean, some of them he designed and built. Some of them he just designed, and we don't know whether or not he actually built them. But part of the promise of the show, the sort of candy of the show, is that he is going to build and employ a lot of those things. And it's a push-pull because some of them we actually build, and they're very expensive or augment with visual effects, and so we can kind of afford to do one every 2 episodes. So we've got 10 episodes this season, so I think we've got about 5 this season.
He was a busy boy. He had time for a lot of sex, too.
He did.
He did.
Polyamorous sex.
More time than I do. Yes, polyamorous sex.
Is the sexuality something that you had researched that is true? I mean, I didn't know that about him.
Well, I mean,
there's certainly...
There's one camp that say he was homosexual. There's another camp that maintained he was heterosexual. There's another camp that maintains he was bisexual.
Asexual.
Asexual. I'm sort of in the camp that he was bisexual, and that particularly in artists and people in and amongst Florence at the time in the Renaissance, that was relatively common, and it didn't have people were not as uptight about sexuality back then, oddly enough, as they are now. It wasn't like a big deal.
But I think the route that we took that was the most interesting is that if in his notebooks he had written down, this is my sexuality, this is who I'm in love with, at any point it would have been sacrilegious to deviate from that. But he never wrote anything down.
He never commented on his sexuality
ever
throughout his life.
So the fact that there is nothing there, he chose to not define himself by that, was very interesting. Why did he choose that? Maybe that's the route we should take. We certainly didn't avoid the sexuality question to please an audience one way or the other. It's just what would make a man not self-define,
in the 5th episode.
People seem more accepting of violence, I feel like, than they are of
Well, that's people in America are more accepting of violence, and people in Europe are more accepting of sexuality. I mean, it's the puritanical thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.